It was a hot July afternoon in 2019 when the quiet suburban community of Cedar City was thrust into chaos. Behind closed doors, a seemingly idyllic suburban life was unraveling, leading to a shocking act that would alter the community forever. William Francis, a respected high school principal, returned home to find his wife Nicole in bed with Dean Nelson, the 19-year-old son of his neighbors. William Francis was a dedicated high school principal known for his strict discipline and commitment to his students. His focus on work created an emotional distance at home, leading to a widening gap with his wife. Nicole Francis was an art therapist whose vibrant personality contrasted with her increasingly restless spirit. Unfulfilled in her marriage and haunted by the couple's inability to conceive, she yearned for something more. Next door, Rachel Nelson was a soft-spoken school librarian, still grieving the loss of her husband and struggling to find her footing in a new town. Her life now revolved around her son, Dean, whom she saw as her last emotional anchor. Dean Nelson was a 19-year-old college student, introverted and intelligent, studying computer science. Initially shy and awkward, he was drawn into a forbidden romance that awakened a passion he never knew existed. William and Nicole Francis appeared to have the perfect marriage in their early years together. William, a determined and hard-working man, quickly rose through the ranks of the education system to become the principal of Cedar City High School. Nicole, with her vibrant personality and creative spirit, found fulfillment in her work as an art therapist, helping others heal through creativity. Their lives seemed to be on the right track, with both partners excelling in their respective careers and supporting each other's ambitions. In the early days, they were a couple in sync, sharing dreams of building a future together. They attended social events, hosted dinner parties, and were often seen as the ideal couple by friends and colleagues. They seemed to have it all: a promising career, a loving marriage, and a bright future ahead of them. But as time passed, the challenges of life began to take their toll, slowly revealing the cracks beneath the surface. As William became more entrenched in his role as principal, the demands of the job grew. Long hours at the school, late-night meetings, and the constant pressure to maintain high standards began to take a toll on him. William's dedication to his work, while admirable, led to emotional distance between him and Nicole. He was often too exhausted to engage in meaningful conversation, and the time they once spent together became scarce. Nicole, who had once been content in her role as a supportive partner, began to feel neglected. Compounding this emotional distance was the couple's struggle with infertility. Despite their best efforts, William and Nicole were unable to conceive a child, a source of deep disappointment and sadness for both of them. For Nicole, this inability to start a family left her feeling unfulfilled, and she began to question the direction of her life. Her work as an art therapist, which had once been a source of joy, no longer seemed enough to fill the void she felt inside. The strain on their marriage was palpable, yet neither William nor Nicole knew how to bridge the growing gap between them. They were caught in a cycle of frustration and unmet expectations, unsure of how to move forward. Despite the growing distance between them, William and Nicole were determined to maintain the appearance of a happy marriage to the outside world. They continued to attend social events, smile for photos, and exchange pleasantries with friends and neighbors. To those around them, they seemed like a couple who had it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a solid marriage. But behind closed doors, the reality was much different. The facade of happiness became a mask they wore, hiding the pain and dissatisfaction that simmered beneath the surface. Nicole's restlessness grew, and she began to withdraw into herself, finding solace in her art and the quiet moments when she could be alone with her thoughts. William, too, buried himself in his work, avoiding the difficult conversations that he knew were necessary but feared would expose the cracks in their relationship. Their marriage, once a source of strength and joy, had become a fragile structure held together by appearances. They both knew that something had to change, but neither was sure where to begin. It all started with a seemingly innocent encounter at a neighborhood barbecue. The sun was setting over Cedar City, casting a warm glow on the small gathering of friends and neighbors. Nicole Francis, with her usual vibrant energy, was mingling with guests, engaging in light conversation as she often did at these community events. Dean Nelson was there too, reluctantly attending at the urging of his mother, who thought it might be good for him to socialize more. Nicole and Dean's paths crossed by the grill, where the scent of sizzling burgers and charred vegetables filled the air. What began as a simple exchange of pleasantries quickly evolved into something more. There was an undeniable connection between them, a spark that neither had anticipated. Nicole, with her magnetic personality and warmth, drew Dean in, making him feel comfortable in a way he rarely experienced. For Dean, who was used to feeling out of place at social gatherings, Nicole's attention was intoxicating. As the evening wore on, Nicole and Dean found themselves in deep conversation, discussing everything from art to literature to life's challenges. Nicole was captivated by Dean's intelligence and thoughtful nature, while Dean was drawn to Nicole's creativity and passion. There was a chemistry between them that neither could ignore, a pull that felt both exciting and forbidden. By the time the barbecue ended, something had shifted. What had started as a chance encounter had ignited a spark that would soon grow into something much more dangerous. Both Nicole and Dean left the barbecue with a sense of anticipation, a feeling that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. What began as a spark at a neighborhood barbecue soon grew into a full-blown affair. Nicole Francis, a 43-year-old art therapist struggling with feelings of emptiness, found herself drawn more and more to Dean Nelson, the quiet and introspective college student who had entered her life unexpectedly. The connection between them, born out of casual conversations, quickly deepened into something much more intense and secretive. At first, their meetings were innocent. Nicole would invite Dean to her home under the guise of discussing art or offering him advice on his studies. But as the weeks passed, these visits became more frequent and less innocent. There was a growing intensity between them, fueled by Nicole's yearning to feel alive again and Dean's youthful passion. Nicole, who had spent years feeling unfulfilled in her marriage to William, was captivated by the attention and desire she felt from Dean. For Dean, the affair was thrilling and dangerous, an escape from his otherwise ordinary life. They began meeting in secret, always careful to avoid suspicion. Sometimes, it was in the quiet of Nicole's home while William was away at work, or in the secluded corners of local parks, where they could talk without fear of being seen. Each meeting intensified their feelings, pulling them deeper into an emotional and physical relationship that neither could easily control. Nicole was driven by a need to reclaim a part of herself that she felt had been lost in the routine of her marriage, while Dean was consumed by the excitement of being with an older, more experienced woman. As their affair escalated, Nicole and Dean both became adept at hiding the truth. Nicole maintained her role as a devoted wife and respected therapist, while Dean continued his studies as if nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, their secret relationship was taking a toll on both of them. The excitement of the affair began to mix with the fear of being discovered, creating a volatile emotional cocktail that made it impossible for either of them to think clearly. As the affair between Nicole Francis and Dean Nelson continued, the initial thrill began to give way to a heavy burden of guilt. What had started as a passionate escape now felt increasingly complicated and dangerous. For Nicole, every glance at her husband, William, reminded her of the lies she was telling. William, the dedicated high school principal who had worked so hard to provide a good life for them, was completely unaware of the betrayal happening right under his nose. Nicole's guilt gnawed at her, making it harder to keep up the facade of a happy marriage. Dean, too, was struggling. The affair had started as something exciting and new, but it soon became a source of deep internal conflict. William had been more than just the principal of Cedar City High School. He had been a mentor to Dean, someone who had guided him through the challenges of adolescence and encouraged his academic pursuits. The realization that he was betraying a man he respected weighed heavily on Dean. The more their affair continued, the more conflicted he became, torn between his desire for Nicole and his growing sense of shame. Both Nicole and Dean found themselves caught in a web of deception. Nicole had to become skilled at lying, creating excuses for her absences and hiding the true nature of her relationship with Dean. Each lie pulled her deeper into a cycle of guilt and self-loathing, but she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. For Dean, every encounter with William became a painful reminder of his betrayal, making it difficult for him to even look the older man in the eye. July 15th, 2019, was a day that began like any other summer day in Cedar City. But for Nicole Francis and Dean Nelson, this day carried a heavy sense of finality. After months of secrecy and guilt, they had decided to end their affair. The tension was palpable as they prepared for what they believed would be their last time together. Nicole, torn between her emotions, knew she couldn't keep living a double life. Dean, equally conflicted, was ready to break free from the web of lies that had ensnared him. As they made their way to the Francis home, they both felt the weight of what was about to happen. The home was quiet that afternoon, the stillness almost eerie. Nicole and Dean, believing they were alone, retreated to the master bedroom, where their affair had played out in secret. As they lay in bed, the emotions between them were a mix of sadness, relief, and uncertainty about the future. They were unaware that William, who was supposed to be at a school meeting, had returned home unexpectedly. William had come back early, driven by an uneasy feeling he couldn't quite explain. As he walked through the door and into the house, he noticed something was off. The house, usually filled with the sounds of life, was oddly silent. Following his instincts, William quietly made his way upstairs. When he reached the bedroom door and saw it slightly ajar, his heart sank. Pushing the door open, he was met with a sight that would forever change his life. His wife, Nicole, in bed with Dean Nelson, the young man he had mentored and trusted. The shock and betrayal William felt in that instant ignited a fury unlike anything he had ever experienced. Without thinking, he lunged at Dean, his vision blurred with rage. The room erupted into chaos as William's anger turned physical. Nicole screamed, trying to pull William away, but the force of his emotions made him unstoppable. Dean, caught off guard, tried to defend himself, but William was much stronger and fueled by a blinding wrath. As the struggle escalated, William's eyes fell upon a heavy crystal bookend on the nightstand. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, he grabbed it and, with all his strength, struck Dean on the head. The sound of the impact was sickeningly final. Dean collapsed, his body lifeless on the floor. The room, once filled with tension and anger, was now silent, except for Nicole's sobs and the sound of William's heavy breathing. The aftermath of July 15th, 2019, unfolded rapidly and with devastating clarity. When William Francis was found in the master bedroom, his face set in a mask of anguish and anger, the scene quickly shifted from a private tragedy to a public spectacle. The police arrived within minutes, summoned by a frantic 911 call from Nicole. As officers and detectives poured into the Francis home, the reality of the violence that had occurred became starkly evident. William was arrested on the spot, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline and shock of his actions. The community was thrown into turmoil, grappling with the horror of what had happened behind closed doors. The once quiet neighborhood was now awash with flashing lights and murmurs of disbelief. For Rachel Nelson, the news of her son's death was a crushing blow. The moment she learned that Dean had been killed, her world fell apart. Rachel, who had been trying to build a new life after the death of her husband, found herself facing an even deeper sorrow. The emotional weight of losing her only child was unbearable. She collapsed at the news, her grief overwhelming her physical strength. The funeral, when it came, was marked by a profound sense of loss and disbelief, as Rachel struggled to come to terms with her son's sudden and violent death. Detective Aaron Ray was assigned to the case, stepping into a scene fraught with tension and complex emotions. Her job was to piece together the fragmented events of that fateful day. Ray methodically collected evidence from the crime scene, taking detailed photographs and gathering forensic samples. She interviewed neighbors who had witnessed the aftermath or heard the commotion, trying to build a coherent narrative from the chaotic fragments of the day. Each interview and piece of evidence painted a picture of a tragic intersection of lives and choices. As news of the murder spread through Cedar City, the community's reaction was a mix of shock, confusion, and sympathy. The tragedy had no clear heroes or villains. Instead, it presented a complex web of human frailties and mistakes. Neighbors who had known the two families were stunned by the events. Some expressed anger and judgment towards William, while others felt deep sympathy for Nicole and Rachel. The media coverage was relentless, portraying the story from various angles and adding to the public's uncertainty and distress. In a small town where everyone knew everyone else, this tragedy became a grim reminder of the hidden struggles that often lie beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary lives. The trial of William Francis began 6 months after the tragic events of July 15, 2019. The courtroom was packed with media, spectators, and residents of Cedar City, all drawn by the intense public interest in the case. The proceedings were a dramatic spectacle, with the courtroom becoming a stage for the unfolding legal battle. The prosecution argued that William's actions were premeditated, highlighting his anger and the brutality of the attack. They painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by jealousy and rage. On the other side, the defense contended that William's actions were a result of a moment of uncontrollable emotional distress, arguing that he had been driven to the edge by a complex web of personal issues. The trial was not only a legal contest, but also a public examination of the emotional and moral dimensions of the case. Nicole Francis took the stand and, with visible emotion, recounted the affair with Dean Nelson. Her testimony was a poignant exploration of her internal conflict, her feelings of regret, and the complexities of her actions. Nicole's account painted a picture of a woman caught in a whirlwind of passion and guilt, struggling to reconcile her desires with the consequences of her choices. Rachel Nelson's testimony was equally moving. She described her son Dean with a mother's love and pride, recounting his intelligence, kindness, and the deep void left by his loss. Rachel's grief was palpable as she spoke of her son's potential and the pain of his untimely death. Her words conveyed the depth of her sorrow and the impact of the loss on her life. Expert witnesses provided critical insights into the psychological dimensions of the case. Psychologists testified about the effects of infidelity on individuals and relationships. They discussed the emotional turmoil experienced by Nicole and William, examining how infidelity can lead to intense psychological stress and dysfunction. As the trial concluded, the courtroom fell into a tense silence, filled with anticipation for the jury's verdict. The jury, isolated to ensure an unbiased decision, deliberated over the evidence and testimonies presented throughout the trial. The suspense reached its peak when the jury finally returned to court. With bated breath, everyone awaited the verdict that would determine William Francis's fate. The courtroom was packed with observers, their faces a mix of anxiety and expectation. Judge Willis, after the verdict was read, imposed a sentence of 18 years in prison for William Francis. The sentence came with the possibility of parole after 12 years, reflecting the severity of the crime while also acknowledging the circumstances surrounding it. The judge's decision aimed to balance justice for Dean Nelson's death with an understanding of William's emotional and psychological state at the time of the crime. The sentence was met with mixed reactions from the public and the families involved, each interpreting it through their own lens of loss and justice. In the final moments of the courtroom, William Francis was led away in handcuffs, a stark symbol of the gravity of his actions. The scene was heavy with emotion as his family and supporters looked on, grappling with the reality of his imprisonment. The community of Cedar City, deeply affected by the case, was left to process the aftermath. The trial had exposed deep-seated issues and personal tragedies, and the sentence only served to highlight the complexity of the human condition. The case left a profound impact on the community, who now faced the challenge of moving forward amidst the shadows of the past. For the Francises and the Nelsons, the trial and its outcome were the beginning of a new chapter, defined by both the consequences of their actions and the ongoing struggle to heal from the tragedy that had unfolded. As William Francis was led away to serve his 18-year sentence, the ripple effects of the tragedy were felt far and wide. The once serene neighborhood was now a backdrop of turmoil and grief, each family member grappling with their own demons. The resolution of the trial brought no true closure, only a lingering question of how such a shocking series of events could alter lives so irrevocably. The echoes of that fateful day would resonate through the community for years to come. a stark reminder of the unpredictable consequences of human actions.